Hello everybody, JGC Anime here, and today we are going to be reviewing Mob Psycho 100. Now, this anime and I kind of have an interesting history where I actually reviewed the first season of this show a long time ago. I think it was about a year or so ago, and I gave it a very mixed review where I thought it was okay at best. And the reason behind that was I had just finished not too long ago watching One Punch Man, and since I'm pretty sure they were by the same people, I was thinking, oh, this is gonna be like One Punch Man, but it was more than that, and because I wasn't expecting that, I ended up not caring about it much at all, and honestly not thinking it was that good. But then somebody in the comments told me, hey, maybe you should give the show a shot again, but not with that mindset, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna do that, and honestly, I am so glad I decided to do that, because it just... I feel so stupid about my past self saying this was just mediocre, because I have so many positive things to say about this show now. It's not like a perfect show, but we'll talk about it in a bit. So, what is Mob Psycho 100? Mob Psycho 100 is a story about this character named Mob, or his other name, Shigeo, where he's like this esper that's extremely OP, trying to go about his day, and works under this guy called Reigen, who is quote-unquote a very powerful esper. And the two of them work together to exercise spirits as Reigen runs a shady business. And that's kind of like the way the story starts. It gets more serious down the line, but that's the way it starts. So, yeah, it's their adventures and what comes of Shigeo's adventures. So, that's the start of it. This was a terrible description, but I'm just going to hop into the spoiler-free thoughts. I actually really like this show. The middle segment where we're introduced to some new characters, even though I remember really liking that and when I watched it originally, this time around felt like the dullest parts. They didn't really interest me that much. And I think that's mainly because it was more focused on action sequences in a lot of areas, which the action is good, very well animated, but to me, action is just one part of a story. I really appreciate the actual story element. Good storytelling to me is better than just the action. And that part of the story, while there were some moments in it that were good, mainly focused on the action, so I wasn't that invested. However, after that, when we follow the next main storyline, where we follow Shigeo's brother Ritsu, who I can talk about more in the spoiler section, his whole storyline after that is so good. And the way it leads to Shigeo getting involved and all this other stuff, which I'm just going to call him Mob for the sake of this review, so that way people know who I'm mainly referring to. They really did a great job with that final storyline, which I think was the last 6 or so episodes, 6 to 8 episodes. I don't know how long the storyline was, but it was fantastic. And honestly, there were so many awesome moments in there. Well, basically, I tried to say, well, the beginning was still kind of mixed for me, where I thought episode 1 was fine. I really enjoyed episode 2. And then from there on, for a little while, I wasn't that interested. But then once we get into the next main storyline, which goes throughout the rest of the season, I was heavily invested. I really enjoyed it, and I'm really glad I gave this show another chance since it was just so entertaining. Even if the action wasn't really my thing, and I felt sometimes that they weren't really for me and they kind of dragged a bit, I still enjoyed this show overall, and just there were so many moments I laughed, and I felt sad, and I felt happy, and just even though I already knew a lot of this stuff was going to happen because I had watched this season a while ago, I still thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm so happy I gave the show a second shot because it is so much fun, especially when you think of it in a more fresh mindset and don't think, oh, it's One Punch Man, but he's a psychic, because it's not like that much at all. It's a much more well-developed story, and I've started to see that a lot more now than I used to, and I'm so glad I gave the show a second shot. But yeah. There are some characters I dislike, such as this one character I can talk about in the spoiler section because it is a bit of a spoiler, but there's this one character in there that I actually kind of find really annoying that I'm sure a lot of other people might like, but I hate him so much. My opinion of him might improve in the future, but I hate him a lot, and I think he's probably one of the worst characters in the show. Even if he does have some moments, I just don't like him that much. But again, we can talk about that character in the spoiler section. Mob as a character is very mixed for me, where he's not the worst character in the show, but he's a bit iffy. I'd say he's the third most interesting and cool character in the show, where the other two who probably top him are his brother Ritsu, and definitely my favorite character in the show, Reigen, who just makes this show so good. Reigen is definitely the highlight of the show. He's the best part. He always makes me laugh, and whenever he's on screen, I love watching. He really brings the charm to the show, and I really like that. And yeah, that's all I can really talk about without spoiling anything, so we're gonna enter the spoiler section now. Here's a timestamp to when the spoilers will end. If you have seen Mob Psycho 100 Season 1, I recommend sticking around to hear my thoughts, but if you haven't, you should skip to the end so you don't get any spoilers. But if you have seen it, I recommend, again, sticking around, since I like people hear my opinions on things. So yeah, we're gonna cut to 5 and enter the spoiler section. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so to me, when I was referring to the worst character in this show, at least for me, it's got to be Dimple, the little ghost thing that follows Mob around after his defeat of his cult by Mob. It's just, I never understood him. He's basically like this comic relief type character who was kind of powerful but weakened by Mob and the other people around him. To me, he's just one of the most annoying characters in the show. He's not the worst thing ever. Like, he's not the, oh my gosh, this character is the worst thing to come to the show. Why does he exist? He's more of a minor annoyance. Like, I'm fine when he's there, but I feel like the moments where he's not there are definitely the strongest. The only time he really has any moment where I thought, oh, this is kind of interesting, is when he ended up helping Ritsu once Ritsu gets his psychic powers. When he helps, like, circulate them inside Ritsu's body. That is the only time that I see Dimple as kind of an interesting character, but overall, he's just really annoying to me, and I honestly would have been fine if he was just a monster, or, you know, spirit that was taken care of back when he was first exorcised by Mob. But, he's there, and he doesn't really do much for me, but who knows, that might change in future seasons. He might end up becoming my favorite character, who knows. Then again, Regan is pretty hard to compete with, because Regan in this season is just so funny and so entertaining. Seeing him ad-lib his way through all these situations and trying to keep Mob from figuring out he's not actually a psychic is just so entertaining, and the way he interacts with Mob, being like, oh yeah, you know, I told you to take care of the small fry. Oh yeah, you can take care of all of these, Mob. I'm not in the mood. Like, it's so funny. And then he just kicks ass in the final segment of the season, where when everyone is up against the wall, Mob ends up accidentally transferring his powers to Regan, and Regan just kicks everybody all around super easily. It's so entertaining seeing Regan, even though he's never had psychic powers before, is able to easily handle them as he takes care of all the enemies. It made me think, yes, Regan, this may be your only time to shine here, but this is amazing. And it's just, Regan is just such an amazing character. Everything he does is so entertaining, and he's definitely the best part of the show, at least for me, by far. And moving on to the next segment, I want to talk about Ritsu. I mentioned before that Ritsu's storyline in this was quite interesting, and that's because originally he has this frustration about how, unlike his brother, he didn't have psychic powers. However, it turns out he did have psychic powers, but they were drawn out through him doing misdeeds and wrongdoings. And he takes those things and tries to expand them so he can expand his psychic powers, which he ends up regretting later down the line. And it's just super interesting seeing him slowly realize his mistakes and how he tries his best to make it seem like he doesn't mind. But then when Mob comes in and shows him he's happy about how his little brother has psychic powers now, he starts to break down a bit and starts to care a lot about his brother, even though he says all this rude stuff to him. Well, not really rude, but he tries to make it sound like he doesn't care anymore, but Mob understands that's not the case. And just the whole Ritsu storyline, especially with how Ritsu ends up getting kidnapped but ends up helping with some other psychic kids. He ends up helping himself get out of jail, and, you know, Mob ends up trying to track him down. It's just like this long storyline where we meet the main bad guys of the show, and Ritsu's whole thing was just fantastic. To me, he is probably one of the most interesting characters in this show. And while I understand we're following Mob, who does have a pretty interesting storyline, as I mentioned, he's probably the third most interesting character in this show. Well, interesting in the sense of, like, I'm intrigued by what type of character he is. I just really like Regan and want to see more of him. I just find that Mob has these moments where he doesn't really feel like much of an interesting character to me, since I don't mind the blank-faced protagonist. I've been watching Mashal recently, and the blank face of Mash is pretty hilarious, and Saitama's, like, straight face is also pretty funny. But sometimes, you know, it helps to show a little emotion. And when Mob does this, it really gets me interested in his character, and it really makes me like him, since we get to see more expression from him than a lot of those other straight-faced characters, and I really like that about him. He's one of those straight-faced protagonists that does have some emotion to him, even though he keeps a lot of it locked away. It's super interesting, and while he's definitely not the best character in the show to me, he's definitely not the best of all time, he's still a very interesting character, and I would like to see more of him in the coming season, since I haven't seen season 2 or season 3 yet, but I'm looking forward to checking out both. And just overall, he is a very interesting character that I definitely think has a lot of potential to grow, and I'm excited to see that myself. Moving on to the next thing, the next person that I want to talk about is Teruki Hanazawa, or we're just going to call him Hanazawa for this. Basically, Hanazawa is a character I'm probably the most mixed on. Because, like, I don't love him. He's in the storylines of the season I wasn't that into. Like, him and Dimple's stories are probably the ones I cared about the least. But I will admit, his story was a bit more interesting than Dimple's. Like, I was actually very curious about everything he was going to do and how he approached everything. And I'm really glad that Mob managed to change his opinion on psychics and help him realize that they're not as powerful as he thinks they are. And it helps bring him down to earth. And I really like that. And he definitely is a character that gets a lot of development about who he is. And honestly, while he's not the most perfect character, and while his storyline can be a bit tiring at times, I still found myself enjoying his character, and I think that his whole, like, giant hair afro thing, I don't know why he was thinking to go that way, but it was a really hilarious choice, and he's definitely a character I don't think has too much issue with me, like, on screen. Like, I think he's an interesting character enough that I could see him leading his own little story every now and then, and him helping Mob in a lot of situations really does make things quite interesting. Just overall, even the main villains have moments that, I know I said overall, but even the main villains have some stuff that's interesting about them. Like how all of the members of Claw, they're whittled down until there's only like 2 or 3 members remaining, and when they remain, Reagan, after beating a bunch of them up, starts to get through to them and make them realize, you guys need to learn to grow up and stop thinking yourselves as mightier. The whole thing with Claw and their 7th division, I think that's the number, is really interesting, and plus they're hinting at the main villain coming in. I'm very curious about them, since unlike last time where I thought they were just kind of mediocre, this time around I thought more about it and honestly really enjoyed them. There were even some side characters that I was surprised. Like, I can't remember their names right now, but there's like this group of like gangster-like kids that cause issues at the school, and Ritsu ends up framing them for stuff they didn't do to make them look bad against the student body. But rather than like fully getting depressed by this, well, they do at the start, the main guy ends up joining the Body Improvement Club, the group that Mob I think it's hilarious that Mob joined that group, but the club of the Body Improvement Club that Mob joined, that guy ended up joining and improved himself and realized what he had to fix about himself. And I'm just glad that every single character, for the most part, who has one way or so to develop, gets a chance to develop. And there's so much good stuff in this season that it really outweighs any bad points I have. It's not perfect, as I said before, but I still thoroughly enjoyed this, and I'm very excited to check out seasons 2 and 3, since I really enjoyed it and I would love to see more. But yeah, overall, very fun season. I'm glad I gave this a second chance, since I am now excited to check out Mob Psycho 100. No longer under the goggles of, it's One Punch Man, but different, because it's not. It's its own show, it's its own story. It doesn't have any relation to One Punch Man, minus its One Punch Man references, because this time around I realized there's a lot of One Punch Man references, like a ton. But overall, really enjoyed this show. It's very fun, and I'm very excited to see more. So yeah, that's all I really have to say. So we're at the conclusion of this video, and one of my final thoughts, I think this show is fantastic. It's not perfect by any means. There are definitely moments that I don't care much for. Action scenes aren't bad, but I do prefer more grounded storytelling without much action in them. It's my way of preferring things. But it's not like action's bad. I can get into action. I just want a good story behind it. And the story is solid enough that I can still give this a very high rating. And that's why I just think that this show is really solid, and I give it an 8 out of 10. Very enjoyable. I'm very much looking forward to checking out seasons 2 and 3. And yeah, that's all I really have to say, so thank you all for watching. If you're new to the JGC Anime channel, don't forget to subscribe. I also do anime fans to the channel, and I will see you all around. Peace!